Thank you very much, Dr. Bisley, Dr. Yoshi. It is my honor to join the session together with you. I am YAMAZOE from the NIDS. My research interest is in Russia. Russia's great power politics and my thoughts about it. I have been tracking the developments for years and what happened this year and regarding the Asia-Pacific region, how it could affect the region. I have been thinking about this question, but it is not an easy question to answer. So I certainly received insights from your presentation, and that gave me a new perspective to my thoughts, and I'd like to thank for that. So this work is still work in progress, but I am happy to raise some questions on this topic. The title is The Collapse of Putin's Great Power Ambitions. This title itself is very ambitious. And when I actually work out the paper, maybe I have to revisit this title, but let me go ahead with the slides. I have 3 parts in my speech. The third one is the U.S.-China competition in the Asia-Pacific region, and I will address that topic in the final part of my presentation. So the first part is about the Putin's great power ambitions. What is it? And people say that the current Russia looks like the Russian Empire in the 19th century. What are their objectives? Their objectives is to secure their sphere of influence and also want to get recognition from other great powers. These are the 2 objectives Russia has. Back in the 19th century, Russian Empire and other empires ruled other peoples, but among great powers, they try to seek balance with each other and they mutually recognized spheres of influence. For example, in 1815, they had the Vienna Conference, which led to the Vienna-style order following. That is one analogy. And so looking back to the modern Russia, Russia would like to use power unilaterally in the post-Soviet space. 30 years ago, in a very unnatural manner, the Soviet space was dissolved and fell apart. And for Russia, it is difficult for them to see Ukraine as a completely independent foreign nation, and that kind of perception still remains among Russian people, and they tend to think that there are remaining interests and the rights that Russia has to countries like Ukraine, and if the governments like Ukraine opposes it, then it is okay for Russia to use its power, and Russia would not allow other great powers to interfere with this kind of a topic, and even China, Russia did not allow China to interfere with it. It seems that they really want to unilaterally use power in the space, and they sought recognition from great powers. In around 2018 to 2020, Ukraine, Poland, Russia criticized them. France, Great Britain, and the United States, Russia was still ready to mutually recognize the sphere of influence with those great powers. So Russia was not intended to antagonize the entire world, but they still sought a recognition, in particular as a victor power of the World War II. And to achieve those objectives, what means do they have? First means is to develop its national power or state power as a whole. And then, leveraging that state power, national power, they can use diplomatic and political means to elevate their status in the international community. Or Ukraine, be it Ukraine, Georgia, Belarus, or Kazakhstan, they can exert their influence over those countries through those means. And if those means do not work, then they can resort to forceful means to inflict actual damages. The Putin administration has been around for almost 20 years. And the third means, the forceful means to inflict damages, and they have not always used this third means. Since 2014, they are increasingly reliant on this third means. However, before that, Russia tried other means toward Ukraine, and eventually they resorted to the third forceful means. So the Putin in the 2000 and Putin in the 2020, still he is the same person, but the means he chose was very different. Next slide, please. So the core issue is the issue of Ukraine. Since 2014, forceful intervention started in Ukraine. Until then, through economic means, Russia was trying to control Ukraine, or they interfered politically to establish the Yanukovych regime, for example, who were favorable to Russia. And Russia also offered some benefits economically to exert influence over Ukraine. But since 2014, they primarily shifted the focus to forceful measures. And as a result, if you look back at the past as of 2020, the situation turned to the disadvantage of Russia. It was not helping Russia's objectives because the annexation of Crimea and the interference in the Donbas region, and people say these were success stories for Russia, and in a sense, Crimea might have been a success, and that also helped to boost popularity of Putin in Russia. However, the Donetsk or Lugansk or Kharkiv or Odessa, in the spring of 2014, he wanted to expand Russian influence in those areas, which failed. So the effort was kind of reckless and failed, and the Russian sphere of influence was shrunk, actually. And the hybrid warfare was not was not a silver bullet, and the success was only limited at the operational level, military operational level. And as a result, the economic ties with Ukraine downgraded, which was a loss for both Ukraine and Russia, and Ukraine was pushed away from Russia. Ukraine has to improve and reinforce military capabilities, cooperating with NATO. Between 2010 and 2014, the Yanukovych regime, which was said to be close to Russia, had military cooperation with NATO. So this trend existed even before 2014, but the trend was suddenly reinforced after 2014. Now, Russia faced economic sanctions, and Russia's development and growth was constrained and became more difficult to grow quickly. So with that, what did Russia do? The only means remaining was strikes. Non-kinetic strikes, which means cyber attack on Ukraine. Also, the Western countries were imposing economic sanctions on Russia. So in that sense, they were the enemies to Russia. So Russia engaged in military provocations to show what kind of risk they are running by antagonizing Russia. and influence operations. In particular, in 2016, these influence operations attracted a lot of attention. Countries far from Ukraine, such as the United States, Germany, France, saw those operations or tactics used against them. It is not a military strike or military attack, but a cyber attacks or the operations in the public information domain were used, for example, to influence the outcome of the presidential elections or to divide the popular views, popular opinions, as a way of inflicting fundamental damage to the democratic system. Active menoporiagia or active operations, that was the phrase used in the Soviet era to describe this kind of tactics. So they kind of adopted the similar tactics to blow damage to the Western world in order to deter them from pressuring Russia even further. And they did work. They did work to inflict significant damages on the countries. However, overall, they took a part from Ukraine, which is the Crimea Peninsula and the Donbas area, the contested Donbas area. But in return, the rest of Ukraine turned against Russia. So Russia wanted to integrate Ukraine, but because of its act in 2014, it has decisively distanced Ukraine away from Russia. So from a strategic perspective, it was a big failure against Russia's objective. So Russia fails to secure its sphere of influence, and they did not get any recognition by great powers. So assuming based on the Russia's objectives, what they did between 2014 and 2020 worked against Russia and its objectives.
So this year, in February 2022, it started military operations vis-à-vis Ukraine. The purpose is to subjugate Ukraine and invade Kiev. As you can see, the fact of invading Kiev, putting Ukraine subjugated in order to exercise power in Ukraine. And if it does work, and if Russia can place a favorable regime, which would not be objective to Russia within 10 days or so, then Belarus or Kazakhstan or any other government which may not be friendly to Russia, they would know for sure that those governments would not last. So this will be decisive factor for Russia to exercise power in sphere of influence of former Russia, and other major countries had to acquiesce that. So if that worked, exercising power within the sphere of influence and having them acknowledge that the fact that Russia can exercise power by major countries, but that was the objectives. But in reality, in this limited operation, Russia failed to put Kiev under control, and large full-scale war started, which was not planned in advance. And if that was a consequence, they were not ready for the armed forces, and also logistics and others were not ready either. So vis-à-vis Ukraine, Russia was not ready to the war, and it took about half a year to adapt to the situation, and I think that is what it is. They lost in the battleground, and they expanded some space in Ukraine, but after a while they are losing or they are retreating from the land that they claimed occupied. So the collapse of a great power ambition is actually the great power ambition is not being recognized within and outside of Russia, which was indeed the objectives of the war to begin with. So Ukraine rejects the Russian power thoroughgoingly, and also the former Soviet Union countries are also looking down upon the power of Russia. Talking about Pakistan and Armenia, these countries are considered to be close to Russia, but they are clearly mentioning complaints about the Putin administration. Rather than deflecting, perhaps they are asking for say or expressing their opinion. So they are not going to collapse their relations with Russia, but they are not going to give authoritative leadership to Russia in that way. So in that sense, Russia is declining in that sense. And also Western countries, they do not accept Russia in Ukraine. And however, Russia also is rejected of having normal international relations. One thing I would like to add here is that US and Russia strategic nuclear constraints or nuclear prevention, I think we are able to say that the regime of nuclear deterrence is still in place. So deterrence is indeed in place between Russia and US, and they are maintaining communication for that purpose. That's something I can say for sure. And because of that, US is refraining from having full-fledged military intervention, and also Russia find it difficult to escalate the situation. So I would say this is strategic stability or balance. But in that area or in that constraints, however, Russia is maneuvering in Ukraine. So thirdly, Russia's lack of power in US-China competition. Well, China is an independent country, and they are respecting growing independent power, which is China, because China has demand as emerging economies, and also Russia, China, India, those non-Western countries are having more say in international relations. And the most reliable partner is, in that extent, China. And also, counter to the US power is another reason why Russia values China. So, Russia has a counter power to US power. So, there are collaboration possible between China and Russia as a result. However, having said so, this year, what happened this year is also a factor, but the collaboration with China and to maximize power of China and Russia put together in order to counter US, perhaps that is not going to happen because of the Ukraine situation. Russia wanted to be the sole country to make decisions, and vis-a-vis US, Russia wanted to be the only country to determine the relation between Russia and US. So, as Mr. Eugene mentioned, this war in Ukraine is somewhat disadvantageous to China. U.S., China, and Russia, in order for Russia to maximize the relationship, maybe they could have done something else. But perhaps this year, Russia wanted to focus on expanding sphere of influence. Perhaps we need to wait and see what is going to happen, however. Now, regarding China-U.S. competition, what Russia can do? Russia doesn't have enough power to be influential in the relations. Militarily, China, Russia, working together, that's possible. However, China may not be helped so much by Russia militarily. And also, major U.S.-China competition is actually in economic sphere, but in economic sphere, Russia cannot be much of the help to China. Far East Russia is vulnerable, and also large conflict or full-scale conflict is actually having Russia exposing its poor performance. So the authority as a superpower of Russia is now in decline. Because of that, can we neglect Russia or disregard Russia? But weaken Russia's remaining issues or capability to bring instability. That's something they still possess. And we really have to be concerned about remaining Russia's power of causing instability around the world. So Russia rejects retreats from Ukraine, and also other than Ukraine operation, there are threats that Russia can spread. For example, grain export or grain market, and also nuclear power plant occupation. By so doing, it can be a threat to other countries, and also energy supplies or balance of the energy supply is collapsed. So prices are rising as a result. So for these area of matters, not winning Russia may bring all these bad things to the rest of the world, and that is a very big issue. And also risk of regime collapse, which China doesn't want, I think. Sorry to dwell on, but this is all I wanted to mention.